They called her brittle, said even the recoil would snap her bones, that she didn't have enough muscle to survive real pressure. Then they dislocated her shoulder, deliberately, right there on the mat. They thought she'd fold, tap out, maybe even cry, but Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves didn't flinch. She reset it herself, barehanded, then walked off without a word, and when the rematch came, she dislocated his. Then another, then walked away again. Because Navy SEALs don't stop when bones do, they start correcting. Now, before we show you the exact second she re-dislocated her own shoulder, just to escape faster than anyone else, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Smash that like button if you're ready for this mission. And make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. Because this isn't a story about pain. It's about what you do with it. The sun hit the asphalt early at Coronado that morning. Not warm, just sharp. The kind of light that made every scuff, every wrinkle, every flaw show like weakness. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stood outside the operations wing, adjusting harness straps with methodical care. Her frame looked too light for the gear, like the rucksack might tip her over if the wind picked up. One shoulder hung slightly lower than the other, even beneath the tactical jacket. If you looked twice, it became obvious. Small, thin, paler than the others, quiet. Maybe she's medical, someone muttered from the line forming up beside the tower. More like admin. Look at her, one trigger pull and her whole clavicle's gonna snap. The laughter wasn't loud, just enough to echo off concrete and make sure she heard. Nyla didn't flinch, didn't look over. She cinched the final strap tight, locked it across her waist, and continued toward the staging pad like it was a checklist box. Not a comment. Then came the voice that didn't bother whispering. Careful not to hand her a rifle, boys. Gunnery Sergeant Brett Mallory called out from the edge of formation. Might blow her clean off the deck. He stood arms crossed, 6'1", biceps thick enough to stretch the sleeves of his OD shirt. Mallory was the kind of man who loved leg day and louder mornings. He grinned now like he'd earned the right to heckle. Maybe he had. 18 years enlisted, 4 tours, and a long-standing disdain for what he called paper seals. The line chuckled with him. A few Marines nodded. Neela walked past without a sound. Her boots were quiet on the steel ramp. A clipboard sat on the metal case beside the ladder. She picked it up like she didn't feel 30 stares tracing her every move. The commander overseeing morning drills. Lieutenant Pace glanced over once, gave a subtle nod. She returned it. There was something about the way she stood. Centered, spine straight, hands still. It didn't match the jokes. Too balanced, too exact. Like she'd already measured the room and filed the noise under unnecessary. Mallory kept grinning. But the quiet around her wasn't quite the same anymore. When Pace called the squad to attention, Neela didn't step back into formation. She stepped forward. Today's evaluation begins now, Pace said. But for some watching, it had already started, right when the light caught the tension in her shoulder. And she didn't shift at all. The afternoon drills always smelled of bleach and adrenaline. The CQD pit, close quarters defense, was nothing glamorous, just a square of padded mats surrounded by chain link barriers, one flickering light overhead, and the low hum of bodies trying to prove dominance. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stood barefoot on the mat's edge, stretching her arms slowly, careful not to aggravate the stiffness from last week's endurance climb. The joint still clicked faintly. Recovery didn't mean healed. Gunnery Sergeant Brett Mallory stood opposite her, sleeves rolled, jaw squared. "You ready for a real lesson today, ma'am?" "Always." He looked to the recruits lining the edge. "Let's see if bones can teach muscle anything." Low chuckles. The commander on the catwalk above nodded the go-ahead. "Demonstrate the standard leverage lock sequence." "Begin." Mallory moved first, fast for his size. He caught her wrist, pivoted his weight through, locking her elbow against his chest. Textbook start, but he didn't release. He twisted harder, torquing just past safe range. The sound was small but unmistakable. A deep, muffled pop. Her body jerked once. The shoulder dropped out of place, a hollow depression forming where the joint used to sit. Gasps shot through the pit. Mallory released immediately, fake shocked, raising his hands. Protocol tap out! Damn, didn't mean to. Guess you're more fragile than you look. His voice carried over the stunned silence. Some recruits laughed uncertainly, not knowing if they should. Nyla stood still, face pale, but not from panic. Her right arm hung slightly forward, limp at the elbow. Then, without flinching, she reached across with her left hand, gripped her wrist, took one slow breath, and pulled. The wet crack of the joint sliding back echoed louder than the first pop. The room froze. She exhaled once. Resume drill. The commander above leaned into his mic. Session suspended. Medical check now. She turned, flexing her fingers. No need, sir. It's stable. He didn't argue. That's an order, Lieutenant Commander. A medic jogged over with a field kit, eyes wide. You shouldn't. I'm aware. Protocol compliance requires confirmation. He followed her out, still muttering under his breath. In the infirmary, the room buzzed with antiseptic and machinery hums. The medic slid a portable X-ray pad beneath her shoulder, images flashing on the screen. No fracture, just soft tissue trauma, maybe a micro-tear. Good, you should ice it. I'll adapt. She took the tablet stylus, signed the waiver, pushed the clipboard back. When she stood, her posture was still straight, slightly slower, but not weaker. Outside, as she stepped into the corridor, the same recruits who'd watched her fall turned to look. None said a word. Mallory was at the far end, leaning against the wall, smirking for anyone who'd meet his eyes. But no one did, and when she walked past him, silent and composed, it wasn't weakness that followed her out. It was disbelief. By dusk, the mess hall had turned into an echo chamber of half-truths. Metal trays clattered, spoons scraped, and between the hum of tired voices, one name floated through every cluster, Reeves. She didn't even scream. Didn't cry either, just cracked it back in like nothing. The words were half awe, half disbelief. But the laughter that followed wasn't admiration. It was nervous. At the far table, Gunnery Sergeant Mallory leaned back in his chair, tray empty, ego full. You're all exaggerating. Wasn't even a real pop. She's light, folded wrong. I didn't torque that hard. A few Marines chuckled out of habit. She's tough. I'll give her that, one muttered. Mallory smirked. Tough? She's a paper seal. Wind could dislocate her. One of his corporals, Vance, sat quieter than the others. He'd seen the angle, the twist. The way Mallory's grip shifted from demonstration to something else. He didn't say it out loud, but his silence had weight. Across the hall, Neela sat alone, back straight, spoon moving through bland oatmeal she hadn't tasted in 10 minutes. The voices carried fine in that room. You could hear everything if you stayed quiet. She didn't look up, didn't react, just folded the corner of a napkin slow and steady and kept eating. Near the beverage line, 3 SEAL candidates stood in a loose triangle, voices low. One of them, Petty Officer Marsh, had trained under Reeves 2 rotations back. You know what unit she came from before this? He said quietly. The other 2 looked at him. DevGru, Task Unit Raptor. She was part of the extraction team that pulled 6 hostages out of Kandahar in 2019. Firefight lasted 11 hours. She took shrapnel to the shoulder and kept moving. One of the others shook his head. That's not confirmed. Marsh's expression didn't change. I've seen the scar, and I've seen what happens when people assume she's just another instructor. The third candidate glanced toward the far table where Mallory still held court. You think she's going to let this go? Marsh gave a dry laugh. She already didn't let it go. She just hasn't shown them yet. They went quiet as a pair of Marines walked past. When the footsteps faded, Marsh added one more thing. Mallory thinks he broke her arm. What he actually did was give her a reason to recalibrate the standard. Back at Mallory's table, the mood was shifting. One of the younger Marines, Jensen, leaned forward. Gunny, that wrist lock you used. That's the one they banned after the Tampa incident. Right? Mallory's jaw flexed. It's a standard leverage sequence. Standard doesn't torque past 90 degrees, Vance said quietly. Mallory shot him a look. You questioning my technique? No, Gunny. Vance stood, grabbed his tray. Just remembering it. He walked away. Jensen followed. Mallory sat alone now, still smirking. But the table around him was empty. Later, back in the barracks, her bunk was a square of order. Blanket folded to regulation. Field log open beside the pillow. She rolled her shoulder gently, feeling the dull ache pulse down into her forearm. It wasn't weakness she felt. It was calibration. She looped an elastic band around her wrist and began slow rotations, 20 reps, then 20 more. Each pull tested a limit. Each wince mapped a boundary she'd erase tomorrow. When the pain peaked, her eyes unfocused. Memory flooded in. Afghanistan, Kandahar province, a tunnel collapse, dust choking the air, one arm pinned under concrete, another holding a flashlight she couldn't afford to drop. 11 hours before extraction. No morphine, no audience, just breath and command. Her voice had stayed level then. So it would now. Across the barracks, laughter rippled again. Same voices from earlier. She ignored them and opened the next day's operation brief on her tablet. Escape and evasion. E and E practical. Hangar Bay 140700 hours. The objective, free yourself from restraints without tools. A test of adaptability, patience, precision. Everything Mallory dismissed as weak traits. Her gaze lingered on the mission parameters. Asterisk use of pain tolerance not recommended. She smiled faintly. Pulling a pen from her pocket, she wrote one line in the margin of her training log. Neat and deliberate. Asterisk adaptation begins with loss of symmetry. Then she capped the pen, rolled her shoulder once more, and let the pain settle into rhythm with her breathing. Outside, the floodlights clicked off one by one across the base, but inside that quiet, she wasn't healing. She was preparing. The sun was just clearing the rooftops when Hangar Bay 14 roared to life. Steel shutters opened like theater curtains, revealing rows of cable spools, sandbags, and modular wall segments arranged for the day's drill. The bay always smelled like rubber and old rope. Controlled chaos made training. 40 candidates stood in loose formation, wrists behind their backs as instructors moved down the line with thick reinforced cable ties. Plastic strips clicked and locked with mechanical finality. The rules were clear. No blades, or pulling until your ligaments scream. No improvisation unless it works, barked Commander Ellis from the catwalk above. You get loose using leverage, angles, bone placement, not muscle. Chatter dulled. Jokes died. Adrenaline had its own weight. Gunnery Sergeant Mallory stood in line, shoulders puffed, already flexing the tendons in his forearms. His wrists had been zip-tied tighter than most. His request, he turned to his squad with a smug grin. Some of us have leverage, some don't. Across the bay, Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves knelt in a corner stall. Her wrists bound just the same, but her posture was calm, folded into stillness like it was a breathing drill. A few Marines chuckled as the stopwatch was raised. 3, 2, go. Noise erupted instantly. Grunts gritted teeth, plastic straining under brute force. Some recruits yanked with all their weight, twisting shoulders, trying to find tension points. But Neela didn't move. Not at first. She stayed perfectly still, head lowered, breath steady. Then, with surgical pace, she rotated her right shoulder forward, minutely, fraction by fraction, until her scapula shifted. The dislocation came not with a crack, but a click. Her fingers slackened just enough for the tie's tension to loosen. She rotated her elbow inward, tucked her knuckles under her spine, and rolled her hand through the gap her own pain had opened. Her left hand came free, then her right. 18 seconds. No one noticed at first. Then one voice. She's out. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Nyla stood slowly, rotating her shoulder back against the concrete pillar beside her. One soft pop as the joint reset. A wince flickered across her face, but only for a breath. She raised her arms. Neutral. Commander Ellis stared from above. Then checked the stopwatch. 18 seconds. Verified. The whole bay went quiet. On the far side, Mallory was still yanking. Face flushed, arms flexed to the point of strain, wrists rubbed raw and pink. Technique, someone whispered. She popped it out on purpose. Dislocated it, just to escape. Ellis scribbled a note into his pad, eyes never leaving her. Mallory didn't look up. He couldn't. He was still stuck, still wrestling with plastic. And across the bay, the woman he mocked stood free, calm, still breathing like it was just another drill. Mallory kept pulling. The cable ties dug into the skin of his wrists, turning from tight to raw and then from raw to something that bled under the plastic. He grunted through his teeth, arms trembling with each jerk. The more he fought, the tighter the restraint bit down. "Just fold your thumbs under," one of his Marines whispered. "I am," Mallory snapped. "This plastic's defective." "Or the problem's not the plastic," someone else muttered under breath. Across the bay, Nyla stood near the instructor table, rolling her shoulder against the corner of the steel post with slow, mechanical pressure. Her jacket sleeve had been peeled back, exposing the faint outline of a compression wrap beneath. The arm still moved, barely, but it moved. 18 seconds, Commander Ellis repeated, almost to himself. He wasn't praising her, wasn't doubting her either. He was recalibrating what he thought possible. Mallory finally stopped pulling. His wrists now looked like someone had tried to saw through them with dull wire. Sweat ran down his temple. One of his own recruits looked over at Reeves, then back at him. "She's already out, Gunny." "She cheated," he snapped, standing straighter as if posture could rewind time. "That's not protocol." She dislocated her shoulder to slip out. "That's not leverage. That's self-harm." Ellis didn't flinch. "Negative. Verified technique. No tools, no rule violations." The SEAL recruits started whispering from their corner. Words like asterisk, intentional dislocation asterisk, asterisk, escape reflex asterisk, asterisk controlled trauma asterisk. None of them sounded like insults now. They sounded like admiration. Or maybe caution. Mallory's jaw flexed as the realization set in. She did the same thing he did to her, only cleaner. She took the injury, then weaponized it. Neela walked past him slowly, silent until her shoulder aligned with his. She didn't stop, but her voice reached him just fine. "Force isn't strength, it's waste when misused." Mallory's jaw twitched. "You think that trick wins fights?" She stopped, turned her head slightly. "No, discipline does." And then she kept walking. No smirk, no gloat, just silence. Like she didn't have to convince anyone anymore. He called after her, louder now, something catching in his throat. "Then show me." The challenge hit the air like a dropped weapon. Before she could answer, Commander Ellis leaned forward from the catwalk. His voice was calm, formal, institutional. "Reflex test, 1900 hours, Reeves, Mallory, authorized." "Reflex test, 1900 hours, Reeves, Mallory, authorized." The bay went still. Mallory blinked, his own challenge thrown back at him, signed, scheduled, recorded. One of the SEALs leaned into another. "This isn't a rematch. This is a correction." And no one laughed this time. The rest of the afternoon moved like molasses. Mallory tried to maintain his usual swagger in the equipment bay, retaping his knuckles for the third time. His Marine stood nearby, but the energy had changed. "She's got one working shoulder," he said to no one in particular. "Maybe 1.5. Physics still applies." Corporal Vance leaned against the cage. "Physics also applied this morning when she slipped those ties in 18 seconds. Mallory's hands stopped moving. "That was a parlor trick." "Was it?" Jensen asked quietly. Mallory turned. "You got something to say?" Jensen looked at his boots. "Just Gunny. That lock you used yesterday. If the commander reviews the footage..." "There's nothing to review," Mallory snapped. "It was clean contact. She's fragile. That's not my fault." But his voice had an edge now, the kind that came from defending a position he wasn't sure of anymore. Vance pushed off the cage. "We'll be in the gallery, watching." Mallory met his eyes. "Good. You'll see what real pressure looks like." But after they left, he stood alone in the equipment bay, staring at his taped hands. The clock on the wall read 18:47, 13 minutes. He cracked his neck, rolled his shoulders, told himself he was ready. But somewhere beneath the bravado, a small voice whispered what he wouldn't say aloud. She reset her own shoulder without flinching. What else doesn't make her flinch? He silenced the thought, grabbed his gloves, and headed for the reflex chamber because everyone knew The last time she walked in with a dislocated shoulder. This time, she'd be walking in with precision sharpened by pain. And no one, especially not Mallory, was sure if they'd walk out the same. The rehab wing was nearly empty by 1840 hours. Just the low hum of HVAC and the rhythmic squeak of rubber on polished linoleum. No radio, no voices, just the kind of silence that invites focus. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stood alone beneath a ceiling light that flickered faintly every 7th second. Her uniform jacket lay folded on a bench. Her right arm, freshly wrapped in a reinforced compression, hung motionless against her torso. Not even a twitch. She was barefoot, balanced. In front of her stood a padded wall and 2 aluminum training dummies stripped down to foam cores. One had a taped X where the neck met the clavicle. The other had a sandbag resting across its lower trunk. Target for leg work. She exhaled once, then moved. Left foot pivot, elbow drive, hip hinge, drop and rise again. Every motion, every shift of weight, every redirection was clean. Not flashy, surgical. She didn't grunt, didn't breathe hard, but sweat was already rising behind her temples. The brace never moved. She never used the bad arm. Not once. She rotated toward the mirror bolted to the corner pillar, paused. In the reflection, her left side looked fluid, dominant now where it hadn't been weeks ago. That wasn't a coincidence. Flashback. Just for a moment, week 6 of buds. Cold surf, her right hand too swollen to form a fist. An instructor crouching beside her, voice low enough to cut past wind and pain. Your body doesn't decide what works. Command does. Comfort doesn't matter. Clarity does. Back in the present, she whispered it aloud. Not for inspiration, for calibration. Clarity does. She stepped forward again. Left leg sweep, shin trap, reverse stance. She turned her back to the second dummy and let her weight drag it down in silence. She reset everything manually. The dummy, the mat, her footing. Then slowly she crossed to the bench and opened her field log. 2 entries were already written. Below them, she added one more. Asterisk, reflex, demonstration time. 2100, format, controlled correction limits, none asterisk. She set the pen down. Across the facility, a long mechanical clack echoed as the reflex bay doors unlocked. Neela rolled her sleeve down over the compression wrap, zipped her jacket to regulation height, and walked into the red-lit corridor, alone, precise, without a backward glance. The next move wouldn't be an adjustment. It would be the correction. The reflex chamber wasn't built for spectacle. Just a 30-foot square of padded floors and angled walls. Red safety lights humming from recessed strips along the perimeter. No mirrors, no soundtrack, just structure designed to erase comfort, expose habits, test instincts when plans collapsed. At 1858 hours, Gunnery Sergeant Brett Mallory stepped through the far entrance, fist taped, shoulders square. He'd shaved for the occasion, not because of protocol, because ego demanded it. He rolled his neck once, cracked his knuckles, nodded to the observers watching from the upper deck. 1 round's all I'll need. 2 levels up, Commander Ellis didn't respond. He simply tapped the time code into the tablet and waited. The inner door opened again. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stepped through. Wrapped in the quiet of someone who no longer needed to prove anything, no gloves. Tactical boots, compression sleeve partially visible beneath her left cuff. Her right shoulder still lightly braced, but unhidden. She moved to the center mat like gravity didn't apply the same to her. Ellis keyed the mic. Controlled contact, no sustained holds. Stop upon neutralization. Begin on my mark. Mallory rotated his arms forward, smirking. You sure that shoulder's ready? Neela didn't answer. Begin. Mallory moved first. Fast. Big steps. Tried to box her against the left wall and grab high. Same shoulder hook he used to hurt her the first time, but she dropped. 1 movement. Down. Forward. Angle shift. Her body redirected his weight like water does stone. Mallory's momentum flipped over her shoulder. His own bulk hit the mat sideways. Pop! The sound was clear, loud, sharp. He rolled, grabbing his right shoulder, eyes wide. Gallery silence. Alpha neutralized. Ellis's voice was clinical. Mallory pushed up with a hiss. That was a slip. Didn't reset footing. Round 2. He came slower this time. Cautious, less fury, more calculation. Too late. She met him at the center line, caught his forearm mid-swing, rotated with her hips, redirected all his forward drive into a spiral torque. His elbow gave before his brain understood what happened. He dropped, groaning, hand gripping arm. Beta neutralized. Reeves stepped back, shoulder unmoved, face calm. Correction delivered. Mallory stayed on the floor, gasping. One knee up, the other arm wrapped tight around the injured one. No one in the gallery moved. She turned to Commander Ellis. Further contact unnecessary. Agreed. Drill complete. Medics approached. Carefully, Mallory didn't resist. Reeves walked off the mat without looking back. Each step as composed as her entrance. Her right arm still strapped. Unused. Injured. But not irrelevant. Above, Ellis made 2 final entries into the log. Asterisk Reeves. Neutralizations confirmed. No violations. Asterisk Mallory. Injury due to resisted correction. Down on the floor, the base didn't see a rematch. They saw reversal, and the only sound left in the reflex chamber was the slow breath of someone who thought he could win with force and learned what happens when discipline responds. In the gallery above, nobody moved for a long moment. Commander Ellis stood with his tablet, stylus frozen mid-stroke. The 3 SEAL candidates who'd been whispering earlier now stood in complete silence. Petty Officer Marsh finally exhaled. 18 seconds to escape. 2 rounds to correct. She didn't even use the bat arm. Didn't need to, one of the others murmured. Below, the medics were helping Mallory to his feet. He wasn't arguing anymore, wasn't making excuses, just nodding slowly as they checked his elbow, his face pale and drawn. One of his Marines, Vance, stood at the gallery rail, knuckles white against the metal. He'd watched the whole thing, seen exactly how Mallory's own aggression had been turned against him. Twice. She didn't hurt him, Vance said quietly. She let him hurt himself. Jensen stood beside him. You think he'll report her? Vance shook his head. For what? Following his challenge? Using his momentum? He paused. She didn't break protocol. She broke his assumptions. Ellis closed his tablet with a soft click. Galleries closed. Everyone out. They filed out in silence. No jokes, no commentary. Just the sound of boots on steel stairs. Outside the chamber, word was already spreading. Not through official channels. Through the kind of whispers that move faster than orders. Asterisk. She walked in with one arm. Asterisk took him down twice without using it. Didn't even break a sweat. By the time the medics wheeled Mallory toward the infirmary, 3 junior instructors were already revising tomorrow's training protocols. Not because they'd been ordered to, because they'd seen what happened when you mistook restraint for weakness, and none of them wanted to be the next correction. The conference room felt colder the next morning. Not because of the air conditioning, though it hummed steadily overhead, but because the space carried the sterile weight of consequence. Polished floor, frosted windows, 4 chairs on one side of the table, 2 on the other, a folder placed dead center, untouched. Commander Ellis stood with his sleeves rolled, palm flat on the tabletop. This isn't a reprimand hearing, it's a procedural review. Across from him, Gunnery Sergeant Brett Mallory sat with his right arm in a rigid sling. Skin around the elbow purpling beneath gauze. His eyes were sunken, jaw tight, expression unreadable, but not from defiance, from recognition. To his left, his 2 Marine witnesses remained silent. Neither looked up. To the right of the room, Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stood, arms crossed behind her back, uniform crisp, posture precise. Her right shoulder bore the black wrap still, but her balance had never looked straighter. Ellis opened the folder, read aloud. Medical confirms dislocation to Reeves's shoulder during initial CQD drill resulted from non-regulation torque, exceeding protocol safety guidelines. Mallory opened his mouth, then closed it. Ellis continued. Medical also confirms no complaint was filed. No injury report submitted by the injured party. Instead, a request was filed. Scheduled demonstration, reflex chamber. Timestamp 1900 hours. He glanced up. That right, Lieutenant Commander? Neela nodded. Yes, sir. You could have pressed charges. I could have. But pain doesn't need punishment. It needs context. Ellis paused, then flipped the page. Second injury, Gunnery Sergeant Mallory's dislocation and partial ligament strain, occurred during controlled simulation, verified by all observers. No protocol violations. He looked to Mallory now. You initiated both contacts. The difference was who controlled them. Mallory didn't argue. He looked at his own fingers instead, now bruised and stiff inside the sling. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, Ellis said, your conduct reflected extreme control under duress, tactical adaptation under impairment. This command views your response not as retaliation, but as corrective demonstration. She nodded once. Understood, sir. Ellis turned to Mallory. You remain off rotation until medical clearance. A formal note will be added to your file. Instructor conduct lapse under training review. You may remain in your position, but this base no longer recognizes your discretion in joint drill selection. Mallory didn't argue. He just nodded. The words hit heavier than any demotion. Ellis closed the folder. Case closed. Training directive recalibrated. Nyla stepped back, gave a small incline of her head. No smile, no reaction. Mallory looked up as she turned toward the door. You made your point. She paused just long enough to say, no, I made yours visible. And then she walked out, leaving behind silence, paperwork, and one more recalibration, not just of protocol, of what control actually looks like when it stands in front of you, shoulder torn, spine straight, and still unmoved. The corridor outside command was long and clean, freshly waxed concrete beneath yellowed ceiling lights. A place built for transitions, not moments. But today, it held a different kind of weight. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stepped through the tribunal door with the same posture she'd entered with. Shoulders squared, gaze steady. The black brace around her right arm remained fastened but didn't affect her stride. No one was waiting outside, but eyes followed. A few instructors stood near the far end, clip conversations fading as she passed. One SEAL candidate, barely 20, his boots still too clean, watched her in silence and murmured under his breath, "That's her, the one who broke the breaker." Word had already traveled, not as rumor, but fact. It moved faster than memos ever could. At the bench just beyond the admin wing, Gunnery Sergeant Brett Mallory sat hunched forward, arms still in the sling, fingers nervously twitching at the edge of his cast. He didn't look like a predator anymore. He looked like someone doing math in his head, counting consequences instead of reps. He didn't look up until she was already passing. "You made your point," he said, voice low. She slowed only for a moment. "No, I made yours visible." And then she kept walking. Behind her, Mallory let his head drop into his hands. At the security checkpoint leading to the drill yards, Commander Ellis leaned against the steel frame of the open doorway. Arms folded. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her cross the gap in silence. "You made quite the impression." Neela paused just before passing him. "Didn't intend to." "I know," he said. "That's what made it effective." He looked down the hall where Mallory still sat. "Base feels different today." She nodded faintly. "That's what happens when noise meets precision." Ellis gave a short exhale, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You just made the case for a new standard, you know." Nyla didn't smile. "Not interested in setting standards." He raised a brow. "Then what are you interested in?" She adjusted the strap on her brace, eyes calm. "Correcting what others leave broken." And then she stepped through the checkpoint, into the open sunlight beyond. Outside, the compound looked the same. Sunlight on gravel, tan buildings, metal antennas slicing the sky. But those watching her now, those who once laughed or whispered or doubted, stood straighter, not because of who she was, but because of what she'd proven. That when strength is silent and precision is earned, even the loudest rooms fall quiet. Would you keep going if someone dislocated your shoulder mid-mission? Do you think precision hits harder than strength when the whole base is watching? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reminded you what real control looks like, hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you never miss the next mission. And share this video with someone who still thinks pain equals weakness. Our next operation's already on your screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.